everyone, James Williams, Director of Programmes again. Thanks to everybody for all their fantastic insight throughout the day so far, looking at the whole world of IoT from so many different angles. We're now going to be looking at a particular country, and we're going to be talking about South Africa. Now, a bit of background. South Africa has a population of about 60 million. So I'm sitting here in the UK. That's roughly the same size population as here in the UK. But something very different is that 22 million of those people in South Africa are 19 or younger, and only 5% of the population, or what I suppose we can call aging, which is 65 and above. So it's a very, very different proposition from so many of the countries we're so used to talking about. And it's about time we turn our focus to some other countries, and South Africa is it. And joining me to kick off the discussion is Waheed. Waheed, welcome.
Hello and good afternoon, everyone, or should I say good morning, good evening, depending on where you are.
Wherever you are, and again, it may be July the 18th, it may not be, because this session, as with all our sessions, is being recorded. In fact, we have the majority of our views after the fact. So Waheed, thanks for joining. You're a board member of MEF. You've been in the messaging business for many, many years, and you are in South Africa. So I think you're a very relevant candidate to be here speaking about the topic. Just a bit of background from yourself. Go for it.
Yeah, iTouch. I'm the executive chair of iTouch. It's one of the oldest brands in South Africa, and of course has an illustrious career in Europe as well. I can say that the current predicament of our company's future is very much focused on the African continent, in the sense that, as you just said, James, it's a young population. I mean, you spoke about South Africa, but Africa speaks to the same. It's a young population. It's a mobile first environment, and it's a complex one in the sense that, you know, there are around 54 countries, but each one has its own set of rules and governance requirements and banking and business requirements. So it's a very complex environment. But as the continent lights up, we believe, as iTouch, our experience on the continent speaks volumes, and therefore we're here to assist the international community of business, be it corporate enterprise or aggregators as such, to kind of get access to the continent. So we're here to help with access.
Great. So we're here to talk about South Africa in particular, but I'm sure much of what we're about to talk about now with the other speakers coming up, who I'll introduce very soon, is going to be relevant, as you said, to all the other countries in Africa as well. So next up, I'd like to welcome Anzelle Robertson to the show. Anzelle, hi.
Hi, James. Hi, Waheed.
Thanks for joining us. You're on your holidays in Portugal, so thank you for interrupting your holidays.
I was hoping you wouldn't mention that, but
you are. It just shows dedication. Dedication. There we go.
Absolutely.
The world of mobile and telecoms and anti-fraud never sleeps.
Correct.
It doesn't. It doesn't. So thanks for joining us. Could you introduce yourself, Sam Media, what you do, and indeed where you're from, because that's very relevant as well.
Yeah, well, drum roll, from South Africa, but I head up business development for Africa for Sam Media, which is a digital content provider. So to echo some of what Waheed had just said, the African mobile consumer, it's a young population, it's a mobile first population, and of course there is as much need there to be entertained, to have access to streaming services, to have access to gaming, to have access to educational services via the mobile, as there is anywhere in the world. And that's where Sam Media comes in, providing, and in particular, looking after our efforts in providing this type of digital content to consumers throughout Africa and South Africa in particular.
Fantastic. Thank you, and thanks for joining us. Next, I'd like to introduce Scott Taylor. Do we have Scott? Scott is here. Hi, Scott. Hi.
Hi, James. How you doing?
Good seeing you again. So Scott had the pleasure of joining me, I think, at the MEF Connects Business Messaging event in Amsterdam. So we touched there on some of the topics we're going to be talking about today. Would you like to introduce FICO? Because I'm sure many of our viewers have not heard of FICO, but you certainly are a rather large business in the area you work in, and indeed yourself and your background.
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, James. Yeah, so Scott Taylor, I'm a fraud protection and compliance consultant for FICO. If you've not heard of FICO, FICO are a US-based global leading analytical software business. If you have been to US and spent some time in there, you're probably aware of what we call the FICO score. The FICO score is the leading consumer credit standard that most banks, organisations use in the US to predict credit risk. But the other major part of the business for FICO is the software business, and that's where I fall into. As I said, FICO's been on the go for 60 years, formed in 1956 with an engineer and a mathematician, and as you would expect, an analytical software business firm. What we do is we provide software to all verticals globally. We operate roughly about 100 countries across the globe. We provide platforms to some of the largest banks globally, and that could be from sorting out from originations, onboarding, to credit decisioning, to marketing, to next best offer, to fraud protection, and collections and recovery. So we're a reasonably sized business. As I say, I work in EMEA. The reason I join these events is part of our software offering is like a CPaaS offering. So we have a software platform business called Customer Communication Services. We provide that to, as I say, nearly all the verticals, but in the main, we really do specialise in collections and recoveries and fraud for some of the largest banks of the world. And we do around about 3 million omni-channel contacts per day across all the channels, as you would expect, SMS, voice, but a lot of the OTTs as well, moving into like WhatsApp, particularly in Mac. So we work, as I say, we work globally, but for this particular session, my background is retail banking, 37 years, working for large corporates in fraud protection. But I've worked for FICO for 4 years, and I've spent a lot of time in South Africa. We currently support 3 of the largest banks in South Africa in their communication services, providing CPaaS services. So I've spent a lot of time there, and I agree it's an increasingly digital market, and I'm looking forward to the session. Thanks,
Fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you very much. So next I would like to introduce, I apologize for the pronunciation, Waheed, and Anzelle will correct me, and Juan himself will correct me, but Juan Grobbelaar, it's the wrong pronunciation. But Juan, welcome. How should I have announced your name? Tell me.
Almost there, James. Juan Grobbelaar. So
there we go. I won't try that. I won't, for the audience at home.
Need to roll the R. Then it will work.
Thank you, thank you. So it leads on very nicely to Scott's introduction, talking about retail banking and banking. Could you just give an introduction to yourself and who you work for, Juan, and what your organisation does?
Good. So let me first ask, can everyone hear me? I had some troubles connecting and getting the audio right. So
we can hear you. Triple A, yeah.
Thanks. So I'm Juan Grobbelaar. I'm responsible for SABRIC's collaborative partnerships. So SABRIC is the South African Banking Risk Information Centre, and we've got most of our banks in South Africa as members of SABRIC, and they started the company 20 years ago. Next month we will be 20 years old, so it's our birthday year. And the banks originally started SABRIC because crime is rife in South Africa, and we need to share information when it comes to crime, fraud, cybersecurity, and also work with law enforcement and other government entities to try and curb crime. So that's SABRIC. We've also got 3 of our cash in transit companies. The biggest ones is also members of SABRIC, and also one ATM service provider is also a member of SABRIC. So personally, I've been with SABRIC for 19 years, so I'm part of the furniture already. From the beginning almost. So originally responsible for our analytics and our analysis capability, and then since last year moved into the collaborative partnership space. So many years ago also I was part of our South African Police Service, but that's many moons ago.
Fantastic. But now you can bring that experience in here as well. So if we look at many of our previous panels and our focus of the previous panels, few have actually, I don't think any panels have actually talked about actually robbing cash trucks. But Juan, could you just describe what's the current situation with regards to crime? What have the changes been in the past 20 years in South Africa with regards to crime? And where has crime shifted? Has it moved increasingly online, or is there still really this element of physicality to financial crime in particular?
So, yeah, if we look at what happened 20 years ago, at one stage, we probably had 2-3 bank robberies a day in South Africa during the late 90s, early 2000s. And that's one of the reasons why SABRIC was established, is to help the banking industry to curb bank robbery specific. So luckily, after working with the banks and with the security industry and law enforcement, at least we could curb that. And there's very few bank robberies currently in South Africa. But that shifted, that there was a whole shift within the industry away from bank robberies. You will know that for many years, and it's still a problem, cash in transit robberies is just out of control sometimes. You will hear of an ATM bombing probably every week, where they will just put explosives into an ATM and blow it up and try and get the cash. So that element of physical violence is still rife in South Africa. We know of many instances where customers of the banking industry will go to an ATM and then by gunpoint they will have to hand over their cards and their cash. So those types of things still happen on a daily basis. But we can also see that over the years, there was definitely this migration, especially when it comes to the losses to the banking industry from the more violent type of crime to digital online banking crime. And in the card space as well, card not present fraud, that is still a big problem. It's not the same criminals. It's a different skill set. You won't get it's not often that you'll get a bank robber or a CIT, a cash in transit robber, then moving into the digital crime space. But I think that is the migration of the shift in crime over the last 20 years has definitely been moving away from the violent crime into this digital space. Unfortunately, the client remains the target from the criminal side, and that's what the banks are working on, is to try and mitigate that risk for themselves and for the clients at the end of the day.
Okay, thank you.
I hope that answers it.
That definitely answers it. So it gives us a really sound basis to move forward. Now, some of you will have seen it in the actual description I wrote for this session. There was some research this year by the Edelman Trust Barometer, and 26% of those surveyed covering South Africa trust the government. And of all the 27 countries in the world, that's second lowest. Now, Waheed, if I come to you, could you just give us a little bit of background? What's been going on in terms of the government side of things and the structure from the top down? Because everything ultimately moves top down. So if you can explain what's been going on and what's been happening in the past 7 or 8 years at the governmental level to really help launch us into the conversation.
All right, it's a bit of a sad story. So I'll start off very early saying that every young democracy has this tendency, this trend that kind of goes down before it ends up going up. With the likes of the Mandela era, I was hopeful, and I think most South Africans were, that South Africa, yet again, like we bucked the revolution that may have happened, we may buck the same trend in terms of this young democracy first ailing before it kind of, aspires into a mature environment. But unfortunately, leadership is all that matters, right? So if you don't have the right leaders, unfortunately, that's going to speak volumes in terms of why young democracies generally fail. And that came about for a number of reasons. I think one is that you had a people that came into a power position that didn't have the skill set for that particular position. And that's part of the problem. The other is you had a person that came into the control of state coffers and the attraction to enrich themselves rather than take care of their people became a major play in the government structures. And then, of course, when, as you said, the top down, when the top of that particular government institution is as corrupt as can be, then it certainly doesn't set a good example for anyone below that that may have had the tendency, but never the will to do it. But if the top is doing it, well, then, let's join the party. And what we've seen under, and I'm going to call it out, so Juan and Anzelle, forgive me, but the Zuma era was a corrupt era of government, to the point that they looted the state coffers in every aspect. So never mind just treasury, but we're talking about state-owned entities, which includes the likes of the power utility, the NAL, which is the arms utility. We're talking about the South African Airways, which was a celebrated airline, which is now kind of ailing in terms of trying to keep its head above water. And the others. Each municipality has suffered the same consequence. So service delivery to people has just not been present. And ultimately, that chases away investment, that introduces, desperate people. Poverty-stricken communities just grew instead of reduced in size. And now you have a desperate nation. And people that are desperate will do whatever they can in order to keep food on the table. Now, you have the criminal element. In other words, I'm saying those who will take the gun that John was talking about, and for a cell phone may take a life. But you also got people who are desperately trying to survive and therefore joining that sort of queue, if you wish. The cash in transit, I'll just mention one little thing. I think in the early years was politically motivated. It was ways to fund revolutions as well. So expertise was created through that. And when we came into our new dispensation, I think some of that expertise continued to do it for self-enrichment. So, Juan, that's my take on cash in transit. And you may find that now we in this point where a lot of people think South Africa is at its worst. And if I tell you that I think the worst is done, but we're now in the era of fixing, and that is where the hard work is, which is why it appears to be, a tough time. But during the recent commission of inquiries, James, that you mentioned about offline, we had the Zondo Commission that now has just produced its final report. And in there is all these wonderful recommendations to the State Security Agency and government on who they should, or which corporates they should also investigate because of the idea of how they contributed towards state capture. All right, so we reached an era now where the cleanup is starting to happen. But in that cleanup, you've got the guilty ones. And if you were the guilty amongst the guilty, well, then it's desperate times for you, because the next phase is, you're going to end up facing perhaps jail time. And in this desperation, I do believe that, Juan, you may see another couple of CITs, but it's this kind of attempt to, let's say, discredit the current government, the good guys, and try and get power back to the bad guys so that they can keep themselves out of jail. And I think that we're going to see in the next couple of years from a country perspective.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, just from a people perspective, I think the opportunities are growing in the sense that it's now more important than ever before that we keep mobility going in terms of connectivity, etc. That's how we're going to get to educate people through Anzelle, Sam Media Company, how Juan is going to get the message out to people in terms of keeping their money safe, and how we can get on that path to maturing our democracy.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Waheed. So Anzelle, Waheed mentioned that we're coming through the dark period within South Africa, emerging into light in terms of less criminality and how we go about fixing it. You're business development manager for Sam Media for Africa. So clearly we're talking about South Africa principally, but I'm sure what you can talk about is relevant to other parts of Africa. How is Sam Media, how is your company going about doing its bit, working with relevant organizations and partners and mobile operators to clean things up practically so the audience can really understand?
Sure. So let me first perhaps highlight what type of criminality I would be referring to. So whereas we've now touched on cash in transit and physical bank robberies and so on, the criminality that I've seen in my now 10 years in the industry and how that's evolved pertains to a different type, but it's not particularly less less bad or has less of an effect. And that's the fraud wherever a mobile payment is involved. So as providers of digital content, we typically monetize this via either carrier billing or in other African markets, mobile wallets like M-Pesa or MTN's Momo wallet. Now, wherever there's a mobile payment, there is the risk of that payment being defrauded, either it being the person that's actually selling the goods, the merchants like ourselves, or the actual consumer paying for something that they ultimately don't receive, or paying for something without any knowledge of them paying for it. Now, this is something that's evolved gradually over the last 10 years, and specifically so in South Africa, where 10 years ago, and as James and Waheed and others from the mobile industry would know, that there weren't what we now call anti-fraud companies or anti-fraud cybersecurity solution providers that were helping us. So digital merchants like ourselves, mobile network operators like your Vodacoms and your MTNs and such, or payment aggregators who facilitate the ultimate billings on behalf of merchants. There were no companies specialized in actually assisting us in securing these payments. So remember that when a criminal or when a fraudster intercepts a potential digital payment that a consumer is trying to make for digital goods. So typical example, I'm browsing my phone, I want to subscribe to a streaming service or an educational service. The payment page is being iframed. I think I'm clicking on something else, and I end up being debited from my phone bill. The person actually footing the bill for that is very often the digital content provider, and that's why I think that the onus has come to rest very strongly on us, if not necessarily fairly, but strongly on us to be at the forefront of securing these payments. So to answer your question, what we're doing and what we're seeing, thankfully also competitors doing and others throughout the industry and throughout the ecosystem, so also payment aggregators and carriers, firstly is teaming up with these providers of cybersecurity solutions that actually have the technical expertise and know-how to secure the online environment in which this payment happens. But secondly, also taking more of the responsibility of that entire sign-up process in-house and in our own hand. So in the past 5-10 years ago, merchants would seek to outsource their advertising. So if I'm advertising service X, which is a gaming service, I would partner with a third party who would make sure that my ads appear all over the internet, and from there a consumer can click on it and ultimately. But the moment we give up that control, the moment we outsource, and I'm not saying it's in all instances the case, but it's more likely that we lose visibility of what type of ad is actually out there. What is the consumer actually being told that they're buying? And is it what I as a merchant actually want to sell? And what we're seeing, a trend now the last couple of years, is merchants taking this in-house. So making sure that they have their own teams of advertisers, their own media buyers that are actually making sure that we're targeting the consumers that we actually want to bring on board. So if we already know, if someone's seeing an ad for a SAM media service, that this is someone that's fits a certain demographic, that's into gaming, that's probably a guy, that's probably scrolling at night, whatever. Taking advertising in-house has been a big step. And I think thirdly, just to specify for South Africa, for the South African example, and I'm sure Waheed will back me in this, I'm an advocate for self-regulation in mobile payments industries, or in if you will, value-added service industries. And the South African regulator for wireless application services, WASPA, has done a great job historically of bringing together all the different players in this ecosystem, so the carriers, the merchants, the payment aggregators, and proactively ensuring, even before all these technical cyber security companies existed, WASPA, the regulator, together with all the players of us in this field, were already proactively trying to take measures to curb what we had then already seen starting to occur, being by taking regulatory measures, compliance requirements, and so on and so forth. And I think those three things going forward remain the key requirements, the key recipes into the mix for ensuring that the mobile payment space, specifically related to carrier billing and e-wallets, remains secured for not only the South African consumer, but the African consumer.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Anzelle. And I'd like to come to you, Scott. So I've been here with MEF for 1.5 years, but prior to that, the Banking Fraud South Africa Working Group was founded and very active. And indeed, before the whole COVID debacle unfolded, the last physical event for MEF was actually a workshop looking at this whole area of banking fraud in South Africa, and you've been very much involved in the topic, Scott. Can you just tell me, with regards to the various stakeholders around in the industry in South Africa, Anzelle mentioned that the content providers are having to do a lot, and it seems to be that a lot of the load is placed on them. But are there any other stakeholders, could it be mobile network operators, any others out there in South Africa in particular, who you see as being truly instrumental in helping to prevent crime, financial crime, such as the one based around content? And how are they doing, and do they need to do more?
Yeah, as you could expect, it's a very complex business. When you talk about all the players in financial crime, as I said at the start, we work with the major banks in South Africa, and I do see it as an increasingly digital market. But that said, I'm sure Waheed will back me up that it's an interesting market as in the demographics. It's also an interesting market on what we call the unbanked and underbanked members of the population. But for the population who are banked, that I deal with on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis, there is a very high propensity to actually do an awful lot, as mentioned there before, on online banking. And it is a complex business when you look at the players involved in online banking. So as part of FICO, although I work predominantly in the CPaaS area, the omni-channel digital solution, I also work very closely with the analytical fraud solutions that we have. We have solutions called Falcon, which actually manages around about 65% globally of cards business. So we use analytics in there. So we do a lot of the sort of fraud identification, the profiling. We use neural networks, we use behaviours, we use models and rules, etc., to identify fraud. So we are part of that solution from a kind of analytical sense. We then bring in the communications platform, omnichannel, and what we bring in, what I call layering, whereby we bring in another layer. Now that other layer could give what I call trust to the consumer and to the customers in South Africa. So how we do that is various elements. So obviously we work, as you see, with a working group to try and do new innovations. That MEF has been fantastic in delivering a sender ID registry to provide trust to alpha tags. In South Africa, we don't have alpha tags, commonly used in South Africa, certainly not from an acceptability part from the banks in South Africa. We then, in the UK market, if I look at UK market, we have a really mature SIM swap solution, a real-time API across all the networks. So I think from a mobile network operator, once again, I think there's a little bit more we can do in South Africa to develop that real-time API solution across the large MNOs that you mentioned there. Then you've obviously got the other players with regards to, the internet. A lot of these fraud, smishing and phishing establish themselves through on the internet. So there's other parts of the industry to play in there as well. So it's not just all about the banks footing the controls or the mobile network operators. There's other service providers in there as well. So it's really quite a mixture of I suppose industries who need to work hard to try and combat financial crime. And that's certainly, what I'm hoping that we can try and develop through MEF in the next few years to try and to get to that point. Because it is interesting, some of the statistics that you do see in South Africa. We do a lot of research in South Africa. It's an important country to us. And when we look at when we look at our surveys, around about 75% of retail banking customers in South Africa, they actually prefer to do their banking online. They actually find it safer and more trustworthy. Around about 20% like a combination between online banking and what I call branch banking, bricks and mortar. And there's only around about 4%, 5% they don't really want to go online at all. So it is a highly digitalised country for the consumers that are banked, but it does throw up problems. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand as well that when we talk about digitalization here, and I mentioned it at the start of the whole event, we don't need to be thinking about smartphones and the internet and everything like that, because so many banking services are let's say, underpinned by what's called USSD, unstructured supplementary service data. So that allows people without a smartphone to transact and carry out financial transactions as well. I'd like to bring in Juan from SABRIC. Juan, hi. Unbelievably, but we're nearly at the close of this session. It's blink and the sessions go. But from your perspective with SABRIC, obviously you work closely with the banks in particular. A similar question to the one I asked Scott. From the stakeholders out there, particularly, I know we've personally talked about the mobile operators quite a lot in South Africa. Are we getting enough information from the mobile operators in South Africa, enough assistance? Or could more be done, or is it a case of more knowledge? What's the situation right now?
Well, I think at the end of the day, we can all do more, always. I think Anzelle mentioned WASPA, so we've also got the Internet Service Provider Association, ISPA, that we're also working closely with in some instances. So yeah, from all the different entities, there's definitely more that we can do. But we must also remember that we've got quite a few new legislations that's been, well, not new, but it's been promulgated in the last year or so. So from a privacy point of view, POPIA, but also the new cybercrime law, with some restrictions on how and what we can share and how we can do this, but it doesn't really stop us from sharing the necessary information to work with law enforcement to get these guys out, these criminals out of the picture. So I think, yeah, we've got a good working relationship with some of the mobile providers, and as well the new industry body that was formed, SABRIC. There's also a working relationship there. But I think at the end of the day, each one of us are trying to cover ourselves and being in front of our own doors, but there's something that there's definitely opportunities to work closer together, and that's in essence my role, is to pull all of these people together so that we can see what projects are out there that we can work on and see how we can assist our banking clients at the end of the day.
Perfect. Yeah, no, you've got, I think it's POPI, isn't it? POPA, you just referred to there, protection of personal information.
Information Act,
yeah, which is very, very similar to what's been on GDPR across the EU. And I think you hit something full on there, saying having this regulation, it's not a means of saying, no, we can't share this information, we can't do that. You absolutely can within the remit of such regulation. And more needs to be done, and we need to work together. So just like to come to each of you very, very quickly, a soundbite, closing remark. Waheed, what needs to be done?
I think collaboration is key. SABRIC has just started, and it's a long time for it to have only started now. So finally, there's that on the table. I think policy and regulation needs to be refined to a point where it does bring onus on some of the let's call it stakeholders within the industry or the sector, because I think in some regard it's a bit loose there, and ultimately collaboration in regulators like WASPA in order to ensure that its members are honest with integrity and kick out those that are not.
Fantastic. Anzelle, over to you.
Yeah, at the risk of sounding like a parrot, but I mean, absolutely. Collaboration, definitely so. And secondly, I think also education. And I know, not an expert in the banking sector, but I have a bank account in South Africa, and I know that I receive SMSs and I receive emails telling me, beware of phishing, beware of this, we'll never ask your PIN, we'll never ask whatever. And I think we need to look at doing more of that in the mobile payment sector. So I think we need to find a way via the carriers or via the regulator or via even ourselves within our own product environments, educating the consumer, saying, beware, you will never be asked to subscribe to something, out of the blue, or you would. So similar educational drive, but on the mobile payment side. And I think as the use of mobile wallets start picking up in South Africa, similar to Kenya, Tanzania, Ghana, and so on and so forth. We need to make sure that we continue that educational drive to also cover mobile wallet payments.
Perfect. And I'm sure that we mentioned tomorrow as well during our direct carrier billing day as well, mobile payments day tomorrow. Scott, closing remarks from you.
Yeah, closing remarks, I agree. So collaboration, education, but also where I come from, financial crime is intelligence, and intelligence is gained through the collaboration. We're seeing that financial crime is more complex than ever before. We know who's doing payments. It's not good enough. We now need to know why they're making payments because of social engineering, and we can gain a lot of that insight into our fraud analytical data sets by intelligence, mainly drawn from mobile network operators and service providers.
Perfect. So thank you very much, Juan, Scott, Waheed, and Anzelle for joining me for a very, very quick look at what's going on in South Africa. There's a ton of work that needs to be done. We're doing our bit within MEF, or MEF members are doing their absolute bit. And we're actually going to be bringing this discussion into the real world on, I think it's going to be November the 8th as part of AfricaCom. MEF will actually be there. We're running a couple of events, and we're going to be hopefully bringing together all the key stakeholders, if I can get that word right, SABRIC, ISPA, WASPA, and some of the participants right here on this panel in person in Cape Town on November the 8th. And I look forward very much to hosting that in a few months' time. So thank you very much for joining the session. Thanks to the speakers. And coming up next, we're going to be talking about Telecoms Fraud 360, everything you can think of with regards to telecoms fraud around the world. Thank you very much for joining us. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.